morning, everybody. This is Giovanni Comandè. Nice to meet you. I'm going to share now my screen so that we can actually move forward our presentation. In 20 minutes, I'm tasked to let you get a message, which is that it is possible for data science to be legality attentive, while legality attentive involves as well the ethics issues which are raised by data science. It is not only a need, but it's also possible. And I will try to show you why is it the case. There are many legal rules that basically apply to any of your work as data scientist. Whenever you are analyzing or cleaning a data set, when you are gathering a data set, when you are training an algorithm on a data set, all these instances involves issues of legal compliance and ethical issues of compliance as well, of course. This is more clearly so when we start discussing in terms of AI. Not just because in other instances it doesn't matter, but just because there is a higher level of, if you want, alert when the magic words artificial or synthetic intelligence are in use. Now, this is one of the reasons for which I will move around the notion of AI and the proposed AI Act by the European Union, because it contains a pretty large definition, which basically involves almost all activities which a data scientist is doing. Now, when we talk in terms of AI, when we talk in terms of being aware of the legal issues which are related to it, immediately we start thinking about the guidelines on trustworthy AI, which has been produced, which is an excellent, intriguing, and useful work. Now I'm quoting them just because these are part of a broader strategy at the European Union level, at least, that is to create the landscape for a dynamic data economy. Well, the ethics guideline for trustworthy AI basically leads us, the fact that we have that, the fact that we discuss these issues, let us think, why should we have a different treatment for these technologies, the technologies related to data science and AI in particular? For a long time, many industries have been more, if you want, with the loose ends, much less regulated. So there are some reasons for which we want to somehow have a closer look to the need to be compliant with all the legal rules and to raise ethics issues eventually. Above all, AI and data science more broadly enable the exploitation of unseen vulnerability. I mean, that goes beyond the ones we are already aware, the ones which are already targeted, at least partially, by legal and ethical rules. I mean, renders gender issues and so on, so forth. And data science enable it to do it in a massive personalized way. It even enabled to exploit eventually specific and transient vulnerabilities. The fact that you are bored right now by my talk can make you more prone to buy something that cheers you up, like chocolate, for instance. So we are increasingly relying on machine learning based outputs, tools, services. And all these characteristics somehow are pushing us toward more delegation to machines. We are delegating to machines we are delegating to algorithms, to software, which is developed by machine learning, for instance, decisions, which are small ones, which can still have an impact. Think about all the real-time bidding every time we hit a web page, which at the very end of the day, it's making profiled automatic decision making on us, on which banner to display, that in a sense can at the same time reduce our options, not necessarily serving our aims, our wishes. Now, if we go back to the high level group and the guidelines, there are three components. And apparently, the high level group didn't touch the legality one. You know that should be lawful, but I said the guidelines clearly say we don't enter into that, which is not entirely true, by the way. I mean, the general principle established on it clearly refer to the legality of actions and choices which are taken. At the same time, the fact that the guidelines highlighted a distinctive role for legality and ethicity in dealing with AI, and here I'm using the guidelines well beyond AI, just because the definition, as anticipated, of the proposed AI Act really expands the notion. Now, one thing that is it happened, and largely it is still happening, is that until we have a clear framework to move on and to work on, there is the risk of basically downplaying the role of the legal rules. At the same time, there is also the risk of overstressing the threats and risks and opportunity. Now, it is rather clear that we need to look to the legal constraints which are enforceable, also because if we have a close look to the many AI-related guidelines, including to some extent the guidelines that I appreciate a lot, I mean the high-level group guidelines on trustworthy AI, hardly ever they actually tackle an issue which is also traditional in a sense, but of legal relevance. Think about the runaway trolley problem, for instance. Now, the risk of ethical illusion that is only referring to what are the ethical concerns with data science and AI in particular, is that we can give the impression that just fulfilling some ethical guidelines, whether self-given, all the great industries have produced their own ethical principles, which, by the way, refer very often to data protection principles, which are clearly defined as their data protection principle, creating a sort of confusion between what are the general principle on data protection, for instance, established in the GDPR, and what is their own policy in dealing with that. So the risk of ethical illusion and confusion is around the corner. That's one more reason for which data scientists should be trained in being aware that there are some rules to follow in a very simple strain. Now, all this self-production of guidelines can also lead to fragmentation. That is, fragmented rules which are not good for any of the player. And they're not good for any of the player in the active part, that is the industry, but also for those on whom the data science output are used. So the risk, again, of abuses are there. Now, the guidelines make clear reference to the fact that the legal rules apply. I mean, if we start having a look what we talk about, we basically have the general principles We have the treaties at the European Union level, but we have a number of legislation that, according to the different fields in which we employ data science, might come into the picture. Now, there are two elements that we should be aware immediately. For instance, and this is just an example, when we deal with data, and more specifically with personal data, we have basically two main reference points. Everybody knows the GDPR, at least I hope, which provides a number of guidelines and constraints which are rather different from mere guidelines. They are binding obligations that need to be fulfilled. Of course, there are a number of ways of interpreting to some extent those legal rules, so there is some leeway for technical discretionality. But still, even the GDPR cannot run against the fundamental rights enshrined in the treaties and in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So these are elements we need to know to have in the landscape to be sure that even an interpretation of the GDPR doesn't lead to the wrong results. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of issues, even in the level guidelines, which are basically related to delegating decisions. Now, if the guidelines move from the assumption that all real rights and obligations apply, it is needed and important to start having some guidelines on that. So one element in the interplay between law and ethics is the following one. Not everything that is ethically acceptable is legal. Not everything that is legal might be ethically acceptable. Now, while law is enforceable, I normally use the example, you shall not kill. If you take it as a moral command, and you are not a believer, and you are not following any religious path or a moral path on that, you really don't care. But you shall not kill, it's also a legal command. If you kill someone without authorization, so to speak, for instance, in a lawful self-defense, well, you go to jail. I mean, you are incriminated as a killer, someone that is unduly killed another human being. On the other end, ethical concerns very often not only are incorporated in legal rules, which can create differences among different legal systems, but also are pushing the limits of law. A simple example, which goes very well beyond data science, for a long time, slavery in several countries has been legal, while of course, ethically unacceptable. And actually, it was this ethical unacceptability that over time has pushed out of the system in the illegality, slavery, and exploitation of other human beings. Now, we could move with a number of examples in which basically there are a number of issues that emerge, like the translational bias. When you are developing in data science something in a specific environment, think about a machine learning tool that can spot the cancers on skins. And this has been developed in high-level institution, and then it is applied also in low-level institutions where the ability and capability to question the output is much lower, then can create, again, a different kind of issues. Yeah, all this is included in a large EU data strategy, where basically the goal is to enable, and that's why, and the reasons and how it is structured, the SoBigData platform, to enable reuse of data. That's where the richness rely. And it's not only the strategy going in that direction, but it's also the interplay between the need to comply with ethical and legal rules and daily activities of data scientists. It's what I call bounded openness. If and the value of data lies in their use and especially in their reuse. This reuse should be enabled by a clear framework which at the same time respect EU values and legal constraints. So we are open to use the data, but we have, like in bounded rationality, bounded openness, things that we can do. And we have to learn how to do things following the rules. Also because sometimes, very often, we are not even aware of these rules at all. Now, again, there are a number of rules which are existing, some other which are forthcoming. But let me go straightforward to what I mean and what is the takeaway in the next 3 to 4 minutes that we do have. The European Parliament has clearly called to regulate AI, broadly speaking, just exactly to ensure that we have an effective, not only ethical guidance, but a legal guidance to those in the field, so that we can have an homogeneous application of common ethical principle enshrined in law. The guidelines on the high-level group were clearly referring already to this. So it's a call to turn ethics and law into actions, into applications. Okay. Now, what we can do in that direction, it's again to move toward open boundedness, as we are doing. And let me skip the strategy and just arrive to what I mentioned at the beginning, the AI Act, the proposal AI Act, in which there are basically 3 levels of games of data science. Unacceptable risk, high risk, which are permitted, unacceptable are prohibited, and some others which are minimal and no risk. And I have been referring to AI for just one very simple reason. The definition that we have of AI is such a large one. Basically, every time machine learning is applied to a data set for a specific, very generically described output, then you are in the scope of the AI Act. Again, the AI Act is not a legislation which is already approved and in force, but it is forthcoming. The definition is broad. And just to spend the last minute we have together with an example, it requires that the training set which is used is free of error. Now, I'm sure that a number of you have already fainted because there are a humongous amount of technical hurdles in having an unbiased or debiased data set. Having a data set free of error is at least threatening. Now, probably this notion will be refined already in the legislation, proposed legislation, but we need to be aware of the meaning of free of error. In this case, would basically implicate that all the standards of the industry, all the standard technological and safeguards have been applied according to the needs. So this according to need is not only the logic of reasonableness, but also required to gather the awareness of what are the constraints and how to play with them. That's why we can do it, and that's why we are trying to develop a more legality attentive data science. Thank you very much.